By the spring of 1944, the German High Command had tethered their entire strategy to the Atlantic Wall. This chain of bunkers and artillery batteries was built as an impenetrable barrier designed to crush any Allied invasion the moment it touched the sand. This illustrates the wall's fatal flaw. The coastline is heavily fortified, but the English Channel remains an intelligence void. Command possessed the firepower to defend the coast, but they had no data on when the Allied fleet would sail or where it would land. This is the nature of static defense. By pouring millions of tons of concrete into fixed, unmoving positions, the military commits itself to a singular, rigid vision of the battlefield. It assumes the enemy will attack exactly where the guns are already pointed. Because the system was built on the idea that the wall was unbreakable, any report of a breach wouldn't just be a tactical alarm. It would be a direct challenge to the High Command's entire defensive logic. That tension came to a head in the early hours of June 6, 1944. Inside a bunker overlooking Omaha Beach, the German defenders were watching a horizon they believed would remain empty. Major Werner Pluskat was the forward observer for the 352nd Artillery Regiment. His job was simple: stay glued to his artillery scope and report anything that broke the surface of the water. With German radar failing, Allied pilots owning the skies, Pluskat's binoculars were the only eyes the German war machine had left. As the sun began to rise, the heavy coastal fog masking the channel finally lifted, revealing the gray, flat line of the horizon. Pluskat leaned into his scope. As the glass swept the water, he saw the first dark shapes cutting through the morning mist. Thousands of ships filled the lens, stretching from the surf to the horizon. It looked like a new artificial coastline made of steel. This chart shows the gap between expectation and reality. German intelligence predicted a localized assault of perhaps a few hundred vessels. Instead, Pluskat was looking at an armada of nearly 7,000 ships. Closer to the shore, specialized landing craft were already dropping into the water, carrying heavy armor and thousands of infantrymen directly toward the beach. The sheer density of the fleet meant that Pluskat's artillery would never be able to fire fast enough to stop the momentum. The Atlantic Wall was being overwhelmed before the first soldier even hit the sand. Pluskat scrambled for the bunker's field telephone, desperate to get word to his superiors that the invasion had arrived. But his report had to climb a rigid chain of command, verified through multiple headquarters before counterorders could be issued. Reaching the 352nd Division, the response was outright disbelief. His superiors told him to get hold of himself, insisting no such armada existed. The officers at headquarters were looking at weather reports and tide tables that told them an invasion was impossible that morning. They chose to trust their paperwork over the man actually looking through the binoculars. This delay paralyzed the German response. While the generals in the rear debated whether the report was even real, the most critical window to strike the Allied troops while they were still in their boats began to close. The debate on the telephone ended when the first salvo of naval shells hit the cliffs. The concrete walls of the bunkers shuddered, and the air filled with the grit of pulverized stone. Allied battleships were now hammering the coastal defenses, using heavy-caliber rounds to systematically strip away the bunkers that the High Command had called indestructible. Despite the shelling, the landing craft continued their approach in relentless waves. The defensive fire from the bunkers was heavy, but it couldn't stem the flow of men pouring onto the beach. Omaha Beach saw the most desperate fighting of the day, yet with every passing minute, the Allied foothold grew larger. Tactical resistance at the water's edge, no matter how fierce, could not overcome the massive strategic weight the Allies had placed on that single stretch of sand. By nightfall, the Atlantic Wall had been breached. The barrier that was supposed to hold for months had crumbled in less than 24 hours. The cost of the collapse was visible in the columns of captured and wounded German soldiers. Once their concrete perimeter was gone, they were left exposed, without the support or the reinforcement their command had promised. When Major Pluskat looked through his scope that morning, he saw the physical proof that the German defensive strategy had already failed. The wall existed in his superiors' minds, but the ships were real. Germany's defeat at Omaha wasn't caused by a lack of concrete or shells. It was the result of a command system that refused to believe the war had arrived until it was actively destroying them.